Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepy History Channel. Tonight, we revisit a time in history that reshaped the world, World War I. This was a conflict that began with confidence and ceremony, and slowly unfolded into something far larger and far more unsettling than anyone expected. It reshaped nations, altered daily life, and quietly rewired how the modern world would think about power, progress, and loss. This is a story of choices made under pressure, of systems stretched beyond their limits, and of ordinary people carried into extraordinary circumstances. It is about how a world connected by trade, tradition, and ambition discovered how fragile that connection could be. Long after the final ceasefire, its echoes continued through borders, families, and memory itself. If you enjoy these gentle journeys, I invite you to like, subscribe, or share a thought below. It helps others find their way here too, one sleepy soul at a time. But for now, all you need to do is relax. Let your shoulders soften and allow your eyes to grow heavy. There is nothing you need to do and nowhere else you need to be as we explore this remarkable chapter of human history together. Let's begin. World War I began after a single assassination in Sarajevo. In late June of 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand visited Bosnia's capital on a tense imperial tour. A chain of mishaps put his car on the wrong street, and that wrong turn placed him within arm's reach of Gavrilo Princip. Two shots struck the heir to Austria, and also his wife Sophie, and a private tragedy became an international emergency. In the weeks that followed, diplomats traded ultimatums, reassurances, and warnings that were often delayed or misunderstood. Leaders believed they could threaten without triggering catastrophe, and they trusted mobilization plans more than compromise. The crisis moved like falling dominoes, because pride, fear, and alliances left little room to slow down. By early August of 1914, Europe was at war. The opening months unleashed a kind of motion the world had never seen, with trains, timetables, and mobilization orders moving millions at once. Fighting spread into northern France and Belgium, then outward into the Balkans, the Middle East, Africa, and parts of Asia and the Pacific. In East Africa, campaigns dragged on through heat and disease, far from Europe's headlines. In the Middle East, old imperial borders cracked and new promises were made that would echo for decades. Across the Atlantic, neutral countries supplied food, steel, and loans, and their economies began to tilt toward war production. Even when no bullets flew, the conflict pushed governments to tax, ration, and police in new ways. By the time it ended, maps, trade, and political expectations had all been rewritten. A 4-year war toppled 4 empires in sequence. The war did not only destroy armies. It strained the structures that held multi-ethnic empires together. In Russia, shortages and battlefield disasters fed unrest until revolution tore the old order apart. Austria-Hungary struggled to keep diverse regions loyal, and national movements pushed harder as losses mounted. Germany endured hunger, blockade pressure, and political fracture, and its monarchy fell as defeat became unavoidable. The Ottoman Empire faced invasions, internal upheaval, and competing visions for its future, and it broke under the combined weight. Each collapse unleashed new borders, new governments, and bitter arguments over identity and territory. People who had once been subject suddenly became citizens, refugees, or minorities in unfamiliar states. The speed of change was dizzying, and it created power vacuums that others hurried to fill. When the guns fell silent, entire political worlds had already vanished. The armistice ended fighting, but not the aftershocks. On the 11th day of the 11th month in 1918, guns stopped firing, and the silence felt unreal to those who had lived with constant thunder. The agreement paused the battlefield, yet it did not solve the arguments that had fueled the conflict. Armies still had to withdraw, prisoners still had to be exchanged, and shattered towns still had to be rebuilt from foundations of rubble. Millions of soldiers began the long process of returning home, often to families that had changed and economies that could not easily absorb them. Across Europe, food shortages and political unrest continued, and hopes for a stable peace competed with anger and grief. Negotiators gathered to write treaties that aimed to prevent another war, but they also imposed demands that many would resent. Even celebration carried a shadow because so many seats at the table were empty. Tanks first rumbled into battle to break trench stalemates. The earliest tanks looked like moving steel barns, loud, slow, and strangely alive as they crawled over torn ground. They were created for a specific problem: how to cross barbed wire and cratered earth while protecting the men inside. When they first appeared, their shock value mattered almost as much as their firepower, since defenders had never seen anything like them. Early models overheated, broke down, and sometimes got stuck, yet even failures revealed a new direction for warfare. Tanks could flatten obstacles, shelter infantry advances, and bring guns forward without exposing crews. Engineers kept improving tracks, armor, and coordination with ground troops, turning experiments into doctrine. Over time, these machines helped loosen fronts that had seemed immovable. They also hinted at a future where speed and mechanical force would decide battles, not just endurance in the mud. Airplanes began as scouts, then became deadly hunters. At the start, pilots were sent up mainly to observe, to locate enemy positions, and to report movements that ground commanders could not see. Very quickly, controlling the sky became valuable, because a clear view could guide artillery and prevent surprise attacks. Pilots began carrying rifles and pistols, then mounted guns followed, and aerial combat took shape almost overnight. The early era produced famous aces, but it also produced constant danger from engines that failed, weather that surprised, and aircraft that splintered easily. Air power expanded beyond duels. Planes dropped bombs on supply lines and rail yards, and they strafed roads to disrupt movement. Nations raced to build better engines, sturdier frames, and more reliable weapons. By the end of the war, the airplane had shifted from curiosity to necessity, and military planning would never again ignore the sky. Artillery caused most battlefield deaths, not rifles. When people imagine the Great War, they often picture rifles and charges, yet the real killer was distance and steel. Artillery could reach far beyond sight, and it could fall without warning, day or night, in clear weather or fog. A single barrage could smash trenches, bury men, and cut communication lines in minutes. Commanders relied on guns to soften defenses before infantry moved, so the sky often filled with a steady roar that felt endless. Artillery also shaped the landscape itself, grinding fields into craters that held water and bodies alike. In this kind of war, danger did not always have a face. Sometimes it arrived as a whistle, a thud, and a sudden absence where someone had stood. Pigeons carried messages when wires were cut by shells. A battlefield could swallow communication in an instant. Telephone lines were laid, then shredded by bombardment. Runners could be killed on the way, and signal flags could reveal positions. In that chaos, messenger pigeons offered a surprising kind of reliability. They were trained to fly home, not outward, so lofts behind the lines became hubs of information. A small capsule on a leg could carry coordinates, urgent requests, or the news that a unit was still holding. The journey was dangerous. Birds faced weather, exhaustion, and sometimes enemy fire, yet enough of them made it through to matter. The simplicity was part of the genius, because a pigeon did not need a working cable or a clear road. It needed only the sky and its instinct to return. These small messengers helped stitch a shattered front together, and they remind you that war can hinge on the lightest of lives. Trench newspapers kept humor alive beside daily danger. In the middle of mud, orders, and exhaustion, some units created their own newspapers, printed on whatever presses they could find. These papers were filled with jokes, cartoons, fake advertisements, and sharp little observations about officers, rations, and the strange rituals of life on the cane. Lime. Humor was not a distraction. It was a tool for staying human when every day tried to turn you into a number. Writers used nicknames, invented characters, and playful gossip, and they built a shared voice that felt like home. One issue might mock the weather, another might celebrate a cook's miracle stew, and another might quietly honor a friend who was suddenly gone. Soldiers traded copies, read them aloud in dugouts, and argued over the best lines. For a few minutes, laughter could cut through the dread, and that mattered. Soldiers swapped souvenirs and slang across enemy lines. Even in a war built on hatred and speeches, the men who faced each other sometimes recognized the same fears and routines. In quieter stretches, objects could pass from one side to the other: a button, a cigarette, a tin of food, or a postcard. These trades were rarely official, and they could be punished. Yet they happened because curiosity and familiarity kept surfacing. Language traveled too. A word shouted in warning might be repeated later as a joke, and a phrase heard from prisoners could slip into daily talk. Slang grew fast, mixing regional accents, army abbreviations, and borrowed terms, until a new trench language existed alongside the old one. Souvenirs were a way to prove you had been there, yet they were also reminders that an enemy had hands and pockets just like yours. It is unsettling, and it is deeply revealing, to see how quickly shared culture can appear. The Christmas truce showed humanity could surface in war. In the winter of 1914, along parts of the Western Front, something unexpected happened. Singing drifted across the darkness, and then small gestures followed: a wave, a cautious step, a voice calling out. For a short time in some places, firing stopped, and soldiers met between the lines. They exchanged small gifts, took photographs, and spoke in broken phrases, using whatever words they shared. Some helped bury the dead who had been out of reach for weeks, and the simple act of recovery felt like a return to sanity. Commanders disliked it because it threatened discipline, and many sectors never experienced it at all. Yet the truce became powerful because it was not a grand peace treaty. It was a fragile choice made by tired men, and it proved that war does not erase conscience. It only challenges it. The war popularized wristwatches because officers needed synchronized time. In earlier decades, many men relied on pocket watches, tucked away until needed. Trench warfare changed that habit because timing could mean survival. An attack might depend on leaving the trench at the exact moment artillery shifted forward, and a delay of seconds could expose a whole line. Officers began strapping watches to their wrists for quick glances without fumbling in darkness or mud. Makers responded with sturdier designs, protective covers, and luminous markings that could be read at night. The watch became a practical instrument, not just a status item, and it fit the war's obsession with schedules, trains, and coordinated movement. There was an irony in it. A war that often felt chaotic still demanded precision, and timekeeping became part of discipline. When veterans went home, the habit stayed. A small piece of gear had quietly rewired daily life, turning time into something you wore. Intelligence work grew because codes and spies became strategic weapons. As armies grew larger and plans grew more complex, information became as valuable as ammunition. Nations built intelligence networks that gathered reports, intercepted messages, and tracked enemy intentions. Code making and code breaking turned into a contest of brains and patience, with specialists studying patterns, mistakes, and repeated phrases. A single intercepted message could reveal a troop movement or a supply weakness, and that knowledge could save lives or win a battle. Spies operated in neutral cities, on rail lines and near ports, often using forged papers and hidden ink to pass secrets. Counterintelligence hunted them with surveillance and deception, which created a shadow war that most civilians never saw. This work also shaped trust inside governments, because leaders had to decide which reports were real and which were planted. World War I helped move intelligence from occasional intrigue into an organized system, with files, budgets, and professional careers. Women gained voting rights in several countries after wartime service. The war asked women to shoulder responsibilities that had long been denied to them. They worked in factories, kept farms running, staffed hospitals, and managed households under rationing and loss. When peace arrived, it became harder to argue that political voice should be limited to the men who fought. Campaigners used the war as evidence, pointing to labor, sacrifice, and competence shown under pressure. In several countries, suffrage expanded soon after the conflict, though the details differed widely. Some reforms granted voting rights to women over certain ages, while other places moved more slowly and unevenly. The changes were never only a reward. They were also a recognition that the old social order had shifted. Wartime experience had placed women at the center of national survival, and that visibility could not be erased. Voting did not solve inequality, yet it opened a door that had been locked for generations, and it changed politics permanently. The war accelerated aviation, radio, and logistics on an industrial scale. World War I forced technology to grow up quickly. Aircraft evolved from fragile scouts into organized air forces, and engineers chased better engines, stronger frames, and more reliable instruments. Radio use expanded too, because commanders needed faster communication than messengers could provide, especially at sea and across wide fronts. Logistics became a science of scale, with rail schedules, supply depots, and repair systems designed to feed millions of soldiers for years. This was not glamorous work, yet it decided what armies could attempt and how long they could endure. A brilliant plan meant little without fuel, food, ammunition, spare parts, and the ability to move them through damaged infrastructure. The war turned workshops into production lines and made coordination a national obsession. After the fighting, these advances did not disappear. They flowed into civilian life, shaping travel, broadcasting, manufacturing, and the expectations people had about speed and connectivity. Modernity arrived faster because war demanded it. New prosthetics evolved rapidly to restore movement after amputations. The number of amputees was staggering, and societies had to confront what long-term care really meant. Prosthetic makers responded with urgency, designing limbs that were stronger, lighter, and more practical for daily work. Workshops experimented with joints, harnesses, and adjustable fittings, because one design rarely suited every body. Rehabilitation centers also grew, teaching patients how to balance, walk, and use tools again, often with exercises that were both physical and emotional. A prosthetic was not only a device. It was a pathway back to employment, independence, and dignity. Many veterans wanted to return to trades, farms, and factories, and that goal shaped design choices more than appearance did. The process also changed public attitudes about disability, because injured men were everywhere in public life. Their presence demanded ramps, pensions, and new conversations about responsibility. The war did not invent prosthetics, yet it pushed them forward with a speed driven by need, and it made assistive technology a visible part of society. Animals served as messengers, medics, and mascots under fire. Even in an industrial war, living creatures still filled roles machines could not always handle. Dogs carried messages, located wounded men, and sometimes pulled small carts through ground that engines could not cross. Horses and mules moved supplies in places where roads were broken and fuel was scarce. Pigeons flew through smoke and shellfire to carry vital notes when wires failed and runners could not get through. Animals also became mascots, offering companionship that steadied nerves during long weeks of danger. Their presence could be comforting, yet it was also heartbreaking, because they suffered and died in the same environments as the humans beside them. Armies tried to train, protect, and care for them, because these animals were part of the system, not decorations. Their stories remind you that war pulls in more than the people who choose it. It recruits the natural world as well, and it asks loyalty from creatures that cannot understand the cause. The war ended on the 11th hour of November. On the morning of November 11th, 1918, the world waited for a time that sounded almost ceremonial. The agreement had been signed earlier, yet fighting continued until the final minute, and in some places, shells still landed as clocks ticked toward the hour. Then, suddenly, the noise stopped. For men who had lived with constant bombardment, the silence could feel unreal, like a room where a loud machine has just been switched off. Some celebrated, some wept, and some simply stared, unsure how to behave without danger in the air. The moment carried contradictions. It was relief and it was grief, because so many had been lost to reach that pause. It was also uncertainty, because the armistice was not a full peace treaty. Armies still stood in the field, borders were unsettled, and politics at home were unstable. Yet that hour became a symbol, because it marked the first breath after 4 years of strain. Dogfights were often close enough to see a pilot's face. Early air combat was intimate in a way that feels almost impossible today. Planes were light, open, and loud, and their speeds were low enough that 2 aircraft could spiral within shouting distance. Pilots could see scarves snapping, goggles reflecting light, and sometimes the sudden movement of a hand reaching for a weapon or a control. A fight could begin with a surprise attack, then tighten into a turning contest where each pilot tried to get behind the other's tail. The margins were thin. A slight stall, a misread of wind, or a jammed gun could flip hunter and hunted in seconds. Even victory could be grim, because a damaged plane might still crash miles away. This closeness changed the psychology of killing. It did not feel like a distant shell landing on a map. It felt personal, because the enemy was a person you could almost recognize. Parachutes were resisted for pilots, despite obvious survival value. You might assume a parachute would be an immediate standard, yet many air forces hesitated. Some leaders feared pilots would abandon damaged aircraft too quickly, leaving machines that might still be landed and repaired. Others worried about bulky gear in cramped cockpits, or about encouraging a mindset that accepted loss as normal. There was also the harsh reality that early planes could catch fire, break apart, or dive so fast that a jump might not be possible. Even so, the refusal feels strange when you picture a pilot trapped in a failing aircraft, watching the ground rise. On some sides, parachutes were issued earlier and more widely, while others delayed longer. The result was a gap between what technology could offer and what institutions would allow. In a war full of risk, the decision to withhold a simple escape shaped who lived to fly again and who did not. Maps were constantly revised because front lines shifted by yards. In trench warfare, a few hundred yards could cost thousands of lives, so knowing the ground mattered intensely. Map makers worked with reports from patrols, aerial images, and prisoner statements, trying to capture a landscape that kept being erased and rebuilt. A familiar road might vanish under craters. A new trench could appear overnight. A ruined farmhouse could become a strongpoint, then disappear in smoke. Maps were printed, distributed, corrected in pencil, and replaced again, sometimes within days. Officers carried them in cases, studied them by candlelight, and argued over contour lines that no longer matched reality. Names on the maps could be strange too, with trenches given nicknames that made them easier to remember in chaos. The constant revisions revealed something important. This war was not only about nations and generals. It was about geometry and distance, and the struggle to describe a world that would not stay still long enough to be understood. Telephone lines were laid quickly, then shattered repeatedly. Commanders wanted instant communication, so field telephones and cables spread across the front like a nervous system. Crews ran wires through trenches, across roads, and into forward positions, often under fire. Then artillery arrived, and the network broke. A single barrage could slice lines in multiple places, leaving units isolated at the moment decisions were most urgent. Repair parties went out with spools and tools, tracing breaks through wrecked ground, sometimes working in darkness to avoid being seen. Messages that could not travel by wire had to find other paths, through runners, signals, or whatever method still worked. The constant failure of the lines shaped command style. Some officers learned to plan for silence and to give clear orders in advance, because they could not rely on updates. Others tried to centralize control and found it slipping away. The story of these wires is the story of modern war learning its limits, since technology could connect an army, yet it could not guarantee control. A European crisis became global because empires ruled worldwide. In 1914, many of the world's largest powers governed far beyond Europe. When Britain entered the conflict, its dominions and colonies mattered instantly, from Canada and Australia to India and parts of Africa and the Caribbean. France drew on North and West African territories, and Russia stretched across Eurasia. Germany held overseas possessions too, which pulled distant seas and islands into the fighting. Japan joined the Allies and moved quickly against German holdings in the Pacific and in China. Shipping lanes, coaling stations, and telegraph cables turned into strategic lifelines, so battles followed trade routes as much as borders. Even places that never saw trenches felt the shock through prices, shortages, and recruitment. A war sparked in Europe ended up touching families on nearly every shoreline. Trenches turned miles of farmland into permanent killing zones. When quick victory failed, soldiers dug in, and the Western Front hardened into a long scar of earthworks. Trenches were not just ditches. They were networks with front lines, support lines, communication trenches, and bunkers, all designed to survive storms of explosives. Between opposing lines lay no man's land, a strip that could be only a few steps wide or a long, exposed sprint. Shelling tore fields into craters that filled with water, and rain turned paths into thick, clinging mud. Everyday life became a cycle of sentry duty, repairs, carrying rations, and waiting. Rotting sandbags, collapsed walls, and flooded dugouts made the ground itself feel hostile. These systems could hold for months, and sometimes for years, with whole towns behind them disappearing from maps. Machine guns made old cavalry charges suddenly suicidal. Before the war, many officers still imagined decisive moments led by mounted troops sweeping forward with sabers and flags. The machine gun shattered that dream with cold efficiency. A well-placed crew could fire hundreds of rounds in a minute, and the weapon did not tire, panic, or lose focus. Open ground that once rewarded speed became a trap, because concentrated fire punished movement instantly. Cavalry were not useless, But their role changed, and they were pushed towards scouting, messenger work, and rear area security. Commanders had to relearn how to attack, because bravery alone could not outrun a stream of bullets. The shock was cultural as well as tactical. It marked the end of a romantic image of war that had survived into the 20th century, even as technology was quietly preparing to erase it. Poison gas drifted into lungs and changed warfare forever. Gas arrived with a cruel logic. It could seep into low places, creep along trenches, and turn the air into an unseen weapon. Early attacks used coring, which burned eyes and airways and provoked panic as men tried to breathe through soaked cloth. Soon the chemistry grew more varied and more terrifying, with gases designed to choke, blind, or blister skin. Protective masks became as vital as rifles, yet they were hot, claustrophobic, and easy to misfit under stress. Gas did not always kill quickly. It could leave survivors coughing for years, with lungs scarred by a few minutes of exposure. Wind shifts sometimes blew clouds back toward the side that released them, which added an element of chance to every use. Its psychological impact was enormous, because it attacked the most basic human act, the simple need to inhale. The Schlieffen Plan gambled on speed and perfect timing. German planners feared a long war on two fronts, so they built a schedule that treated armies like clockwork. The idea was to strike France first through a wide sweep in the west, then pivot east before Russia could fully mobilize. It demanded railways that ran on the minute, commanders who never hesitated, and soldiers who could march and fight without losing momentum. The plan also assumed that neutral borders could be treated as shortcuts, and that politics would bend to military need. Once the first steps began, changing course became painfully hard, because millions of men were already moving along fixed routes. When resistance, delays, and exhaustion disrupted the timetable, the whole concept started to wobble. A strategy designed for certainty collided with the messy reality of weather, supply, and human limits. Belgium's invasion brought Britain into the war within days. Belgium was meant to be a buffer, a small, neutral country whose independence had been guaranteed by European powers. When German forces crossed its border in early August, that neutrality became a line in the sand for London. The decision was not only moral, it was strategic, because Belgium's coast faced Britain across a narrow sea, and control of those ports could threaten British security. Belgian forts resisted fiercely, and the army's stand bought time while the story flashed across newspapers. The invasion also turned a diplomatic crisis into something that felt unmistakably like aggression, which mattered for public support. Britain declared war, and the conflict gained the weight of a global navy, a financial powerhouse, and an empire that could draw in resources from far beyond Europe. One border crossing widened the war's horizon in a single week. The Battle of the Marne stopped Germany near Paris. In early September of 1914, the German advance seemed unstoppable, and French leaders prepared for the worst. Then, near the River Marne, the momentum broke. Allied forces exploited gaps created by fast movement and stretched supply lines, and they struck before the invaders could consolidate. The battle became a tense contest of endurance, with both sides rushing troops toward the front, sometimes in whatever vehicles they could find. It was not a neat victory. It was a hard check on a plan that depended on constant forward motion. When Germany pulled back to more defensible positions, the hope of a quick decision faded. The war did not end. Instead, it changed shape. After the Marne, both armies dug in, and the Western Front began to solidify into the long, grinding struggle that would define the years ahead. Soldiers lived with mud, rats, lice, and shell shock. Daily survival at the front was a battle of its own, fought against conditions that wore down the body and the mind. Mud could swallow boots and collapse walls, turning movement into slow exhaustion. Rats thrived on scraps and the grim leftovers of war, and they grew bold in the darkness. Lice spread through crowded clothing and blankets, and the constant itching made real sleep feel rare. Then there was the pounding of bombardment, not just the danger of shrapnel, but the endless noise that never let the nerves settle. Some men began to shake, stammer, or go blank, and many were judged harshly before doctors understood trauma. Letters home often softened the truth, yet diaries could not. This was warfare where bravery included staying steady through discomfort, fear, and fatigue that returned every single day. Barbed wire created invisible walls that bullets could defend. Barbed wire sounds simple, yet in the trenches, it became a brutal kind of architecture. It could be laid quickly, stretched across open ground, and repaired at night under fire. From a distance, it looked like a thin line, but up close it formed tangled mats that grabbed uniforms, trapped limbs, and forced attackers to slow down. That delay was everything, because defenders could aim at targets that had lost speed and cover. Wire could also channel movement, steering assaults into narrow gaps that were easy to predict. Cutting it was dangerous work, done with clippers, explosives, or desperate hands in the dark. Even when shells shredded a section, new strands could appear by morning. In many battles, the fight began before anyone reached a trench, because the real barrier was this low, vicious fence. It turned empty space into defended territory. Verdun became a furnace of endurance and national identity. Verdun was not chosen only for its terrain. It was chosen for what it meant. To the French, it was a historic gateway, and to the German command, it was a place where pressure might force France to bleed until it broke. The battle became a test of stamina, measured in months, with troops rotated in and out of a landscape blasted into grey ruin. Supply routes turned into lifelines, with one famous road kept moving by constant convoys, so the front could be fed with men, food, and shells. Villages disappeared, forts changed hands, and the fighting became a symbol as much as a struggle for ground. For France, holding on became a statement of national will. For Germany, the expected collapse never arrived. Verdun did not decide the war in a single stroke, but it branded itself into memory as a place where endurance became identity. The Somme opened with one of history's deadliest mornings. On the first day of the Somme offensive in 1916, thousands of soldiers went forward expecting shattered defenses and clear paths. They'd been told the bombardment had done its work, and in some areas, the ground seemed deceptively calm. Then reality snapped into focus. Defenders emerged from deep shelters, machine guns reappeared, and the open slopes became killing fields in minutes. Whole units were cut down before they reached their first objective, and survivors found themselves pinned in shell holes with no safe route forward. The scale of loss stunned even a world already hardened by war. Yet the battle did not end that day. It stretched on, consuming summer and autumn, as both sides fought for small patches of devastated ground. The Somme became a symbol of tragic mismatch between hopeful planning and brutal consequence. It forced armies to rethink tactics, and it left scars on a generation. Underground mines exploded beneath trenches like artificial earthquakes. When the surface became too deadly for movement, some soldiers went underground. Tunneling companies dug narrow galleries beneath no man's land, listening for enemy picks in the dark. The work was suffocating and precise, with timber supports, silent signals, and the constant fear of collapse. When a mine chamber was packed with explosives and fired, the earth itself seemed to jump. A crater could appear in seconds, hurling soil, timber, and bodies into the air, then swallowing whatever remained. the blast was not only destruction, it was opportunity. Troops rushed to seize the broken ground before the other side could recover, turning a sudden hole into a new frontline position. Mines could also break morale because danger came from below without warning. This hidden war demanded patience and nerve, and it turned geology into a weapon that could rewrite the map overnight. Creeping barrages moved forward to shield infantry advances. A creeping barrage was an attempt to turn chaos into choreography. Instead of blasting one fixed line, gunners fired a moving curtain of explosions that advanced in timed steps. Infantry followed close behind, trying to stay near enough for protection, yet far enough to avoid their own shells. It demanded discipline, synchronized watches, and commanders willing to trust a plan that could not easily be adjusted once it began. When it worked, defenders were forced to keep their heads down until attackers were nearly on top of them, which reduced the deadly advantage of prepared positions. When it failed, the results were unforgiving. A barrage that moved too fast left soldiers exposed. A barrage that moved too slow risked friendly fire. This tactic pushed armies toward modern coordination between artillery and infantry, and it rewarded careful timing over raw courage. It was one of the war's clearest signs that survival depended on rhythm as much as strength. Flamethrowers brought terrifying close-range fire into trenches. They were designed for a problem that rifles and grenades struggled to solve: how to clear a dugout or a narrow trench bend without exposing yourself to point tar. Blank fire. A flamethrower team carried heavy tanks and hoses, and they moved with escorting infantry because they were immediate targets. When the weapon fired, it was not a neat jet. It was a roaring sheet of burning fuel that clung to wood, sandbags, and clothing. The effect was physical and psychological because defenders could be forced out of cover by heat and smoke even when they were well protected from bullets. The risk to the operator was enormous, since a hit to the tanks could be fatal. Flamethrowers became symbols of the war's brutal intimacy, where technology did not always extend the battlefield. Sometimes it dragged the fight into the closest possible distance. Gas masks became essential equipment, even for animals. Once gas entered the war, breathing became something soldiers had to earn. Masks were issued, improved, and drilled into routine, with alarms, practice runs, and strict rules about keeping them within reach. Early designs could fog, leak, or fit poorly, and a tiny mistake could mean burning lungs and panic. Training mattered as much as equipment, because men had to learn to stay calm while their vision narrowed and their breath rasped through filters. Armies also tried to protect the animals they still depended on, including horses and dogs. Special masks were made in different sizes, because a gas cloud did not choose between a soldier and a supply team. The sight of masked faces became part of the landscape, an eerie uniform that suggested the air itself had turned hostile. It changed how battlefields felt. An attack could arrive on the wind, silent until it was already inside you. Horses still hauled guns and supplies through modern slaughter. Even with trucks and trains, armies leaned heavily on muscle and hooves. Horses pulled artillery pieces, carried ammunition, and dragged wagons of food through roads that were cratered, flooded, or simply gone. They worked where engines stalled and where fuel could not be delivered, and they did it under shell fire that did not care if a target was human. Their presence added a strange contrast, because the war was filled with new machines, yet it still depended on an older kind of strength. Caring for them took effort and planning, with fodder supplies, veterinary stations, and exhausted handlers who often bonded with the animals that kept them alive. Losses were severe, not only from combat, but from disease and overwork. Horses became quiet witnesses to industrial war, and they carried the burden of movement when modern logistics broke down. New sound-ranging techniques found enemy guns by listening. Artillery duels were deadly, and finding the enemy batteries could save thousands of lives. Sound ranging turned the battlefield into a strange laboratory. Microphones were placed along the front, often linked by cables, and they recorded the moment a distant gun fired. By comparing tiny differences in arrival time, analysts could calculate where the gun was hidden, even when it was miles away and camouflaged. It was careful work done under pressure, with maps, timing, and constant adjustments for wind and terrain. When it succeeded, counter-battery fire could strike back with speed and accuracy, forcing enemy guns to move or fall silent. This was a quiet revolution because it rewarded measurement over guesswork. It also showed how the war pushed science into the mud, where mathematics had to compete with rain, damage, and fear. In a conflict defined by noise, armies learned to use that noise as evidence. Aerial photography let commanders see trenches from above. From the ground, the front could feel like an endless maze of earth and wire. From the air, patterns appeared. Cameras mounted on aircraft captured trench lines, supply routes, and new construction. And those images could reveal an impending attack before it happened. Pilots flew over enemy territory with fragile planes and bulky equipment, and they had to hold steady while ground fire reached up toward them. Back on the ground, photo interpreters studied prints with magnifiers, searching for fresh tracks, disturbed soil, or a new gun position hidden under netting. Maps were updated, targets were chosen, and artillery plans became sharper. The camera changed command decisions because it replaced rumor with a kind of visual proof. It also intensified the contest for air control, since seeing first could mean striking first. The war was no longer fought only across fields. It was also fought through images, shadows, and the angles of sunlight on a trench parapet. Camouflage became science as armies learned to hide everything. When observation from balloons and airplanes improved, visibility became a danger in itself. Armies began disguising guns, dugouts, and roads, and they experimented with nets, paint, and fake structures. A battery might be hidden under fabric patterned like leaves, while nearby, a decoy gun was placed to attract enemy fire. Artists and designers were recruited because they understood color, shadow, and how the eye is tricked. Even uniforms and helmets shifted toward tones that blended with soil and sky. Camouflage was not only about hiding, it was also about deception, making an enemy waste shells on empty ground or misread where an assault would fall. This pushed warfare into a battle of perception, where the most important victory could be staying unnoticed. It also changed how soldiers looked at their surroundings. A quiet hill might be a trap, and a harmless shed might be a carefully painted illusion. In World War I, seeing could be a weapon, and so could not being seen. Medical triage evolved quickly under relentless mass casualties. When casualties arrived in waves, hospitals could not treat everyone at once. Triage was a hard, necessary system for sorting the wounded by urgency and chance of survival. It forced doctors and nurses to make decisions in minutes, sometimes in crowded stations near the front where shelling could still be heard. Stretcher bearers carried men from shell holes to aid posts, then along a chain of care that might include field dressing stations, casualty clearing stations, and, finally, larger hospitals. Organization mattered as much as skill, because delays could mean infection, shock, or death from blood loss. The war pressured medicine to become faster and more coordinated, and it produced innovations in record-keeping, transport, and surgical routines. It also left a moral weight, because triage is never emotionally neutral. Behind every label and priority tag was a human story, and the system existed because the war created more suffering than any one pair of hands could handle. blood transfusions became more practical near the front. Severe bleeding was one of the quickest killers, and doctors needed a way to replace what a body had lost. During the war, transfusion techniques improved, and the discovery of blood groups made compatibility safer. Anticoagulants helped keep blood from clotting during collection and transport, which meant it could be stored longer and used farther from the donor. This began to change how surgeons thought about shock and survival, since patients who would have faded away could now be stabilized long enough for treatment. The idea of organized blood supply started to take shape, and medical teams learned the value of preparation, not just improvisation. This was still early medicine, and risks remained, yet the direction was clear. A battlefield pushed doctors to solve a basic problem fast, and that urgency helped move transfusion from an uncertain experiment toward a repeatable life-saving practice. It is one of the war's quiet legacies, hidden behind the louder stories of guns and trenches. Facial reconstruction surgery advanced because of shattered jaws. Modern weapons produced injuries that earlier wars rarely saw in such numbers. Shrapnel and bullets struck faces, and survivors were left with damaged jaws, missing noses, and wounds that made eating and speaking painful. Surgeons began developing new techniques to rebuild bone and soft tissue, often through multiple operations that required patience from both doctor and patient. Dental specialists, artists, and prosthetic makers also became part of the process, creating plates, masks, and devices to restore function and appearance. These efforts were not vanity. They were about breathing, swallowing, and being able to return to society without constant stigma. Hospitals dedicated to these cases became centers of innovation, and their work helped shape the future of plastic and reconstructive surgery. The stories are deeply human because they reveal what survival can demand long after the battle ends. In World War I, medicine did not only save lives, it also tried to give lives back. Snipers turned simple movement into a life or death risk. A sniper's presence could change the mood of an entire trench. A helmet lifted above the parapet, a hand reaching for a sandbag, even a glance through a gap in the boards could invite a shot. Some snipers worked alone, others worked in pairs, and many were trained to wait with extraordinary patience. They studied routines, learned where a cook usually appeared, and noticed the same officer walking the same route. The goal was not always to kill. Sometimes it was to control behavior, to pin men down and slow repairs, to make an enemy fear daylight. Counter-snipers answered with their own careful hunt, using decoys, mirrors, and camouflage screens to reveal a hidden position. The result was a strange tension, because danger felt personal. Artillery was impersonal thunder. A sniper felt like a stare. It made the front feel watched, and it turned silence into a warning. Trench foot crippled men, because boots never truly dried. It began quietly, with numb toes and a cold ache that did not ease. In waterlogged trenches, feet stayed wet for hours and then for days, and skin softened until it broke. Swelling followed, then pain that could become unbearable. If the condition advanced, infection could set in, and tissue could die. Commanders learned that prevention was as important as medicine. Units were ordered to change socks, dry feet, and rub them with oils, and inspections became routine even in miserable weather. Duckboards and drainage mattered, yet they were never perfect. A soldier might survive shellfire, then be pulled from the line because he could no longer walk. It was a brutal reminder that the environment was a weapon too. The war was fought with steel and strategy, yet it could also be decided by something as basic as circulation, skin, and the body's need to stay warm and dry. Shell shock forced new conversations about trauma and the mind. As the war dragged on, Doctors faced men who had no visible wound, yet could not function. Some trembled uncontrollably, some could not speak, and some seemed trapped in a stare that would not break. At first, many were accused of cowardice or weakness, because the injury was not obvious. Then patterns became impossible to ignore. Medical officers began debating causes, whether blast pressure, exhaustion, or terror could injure the nervous system. Treatment varied widely. Some patients were given rest and care. Others faced harsh discipline meant to push them back to duty. The uncertainty spilled into courts, pensions, and public opinion, because the state had to decide what counted as a war injury. Families also struggled, since a returning soldier might look fine yet feel unreachable. The phrase itself shaped history, because it offered a name. Once something has a name, it becomes harder to deny. The war's scale demanded factories run like battlefields. To feed the front, nations needed shells, rifles, uniforms, trucks, and endless spare parts, and they needed them faster than peacetime industry had ever imagined. Governments reorganized production, set quotas, and poured money into new plants, turning manufacturing into a kind of home front campaign. Factory floors ran day and night, with shifts timed like rotations at the line. Accidents, fatigue, and chemical exposure became risks that workers carried without medals. Skilled labor was suddenly strategic, so jobs could be protected, reassigned, or debated in parliament. Women entered many roles in huge numbers, and their wages and visibility began changing social expectations long before the votes were counted. This industrial effort also tied civilians to the outcome, because everyone understood that shortages at home could mean failure abroad. It is easy to focus on trenches, yet the war was also fought in workshops, with sparks and steam and the pressure of deadlines that felt like incoming fire. Women entered munitions work and changed expectations of home. Shells and cartridges did not appear by magic, and as men left for the front, factories turned to women in huge numbers. They learned to handle heavy presses, precise gauges, and dangerous chemicals, often on exhausting shifts that ran long into the night. The work carried pride and risk at the same time. Accidents happened, and exposure could stain skin and hair a strange yellow, which earned some workers a nickname that followed them through the streets. Wages were often higher than earlier jobs open to women, and that changed household power in ways that could not be quietly undone. Many also joined unions, argued for safer conditions, and proved they could master technical tasks that society had labeled unsuitable. When the war ended, some were pushed out, yet the memory remained. A door had been opened, and it never fully closed again. Propaganda posters reshaped patriotism into a daily performance. Walls, shop windows, and train stations became galleries of persuasion. Posters called on citizens to enlist, to save food, to buy bonds, and to treat the war as a personal duty. Artists used bold colors, direct stares, and simple slogans designed to land in a single glance. Some posters promised honor and adventure, while others used shame, fear, or anger to pressure the undecided. Enemies were drawn as monsters, and national symbols were turned into living characters that seemed to speak. The power of these images was their repetition. You could not step into a street without being reminded that your choices were being watched. Propaganda also moved into newspapers, speeches, school lessons, and even entertainment, until public life felt choreographed toward one goal. This was a new kind of mass messaging, built for modern crowds. It taught governments that a war could be fought with ink and emotion, not only with guns. Governments rationed food to keep armies and civilians fed. War did not only consume soldiers, it consumed wheat, sugar, meat, and fuel at astonishing speed. As shipping grew dangerous and harvests were disrupted, governments began controlling supplies with rules that reached into every kitchen. Ration books set prices, and limits on staples changed daily habits, and families learned to plan meals like small logistics officers. People planted vegetable gardens, saved scraps, and queued for items that once felt ordinary. In some places, substitutes appeared that were more necessity than comfort, and hunger became a constant background worry. Rationing also created a new relationship between citizen and state, because officials could now tell you what you were allowed to buy. The system could feel fair, and it could feel infuriating, often at the same time. Yet it revealed an uncomfortable truth. Modern war turns society into an engine, and every loaf becomes part of the strategy. War bonds turned ordinary savings into national weapons. A government can raise an army quickly, yet paying for it is another battle. War bonds offered a solution that felt almost intimate. Instead of taxation alone, citizens were asked to lend money to the state with the promise of repayment later. Schools held bond drives, employers organized subscription days, and posters framed buying a bond as a direct strike against the enemy. For many families, it was the first time they felt connected to national finance, since a few coins could suddenly be described as artillery, ships, or medical quo. Supplies. Bonds also carried social pressure. Neighbors noticed who bought them, and those who did not could be judged as selfish or disloyal. Some people truly believed they were investing in victory and a better future. Others joined because they feared standing out. Either way, the bond campaigns showed how fully war could enter private life, turning a personal budget into a public statement. Censorship controlled news, letters, and even casualty figures. In a total war, information becomes a resource, and leaders treated it like ammunition. Governments restricted what reporters could publish, limited photographs, and shaped headlines to keep morale steady. Soldiers' letters were often read by censors, and lines were blacked out if they mentioned troop movements, losses, or despair. Families at home could receive upbeat notes that hid the truth, and sometimes they learned about a death through official telegrams long after rumors had already spread. Censorship also pushed people toward guesswork, gossip, and coded language, since the absence of detail can create its own kind of panic. For journalists, the war created a new relationship with power, where access depended on cooperation. For ordinary citizens, it blurred the line between protection and manipulation. The result was a war remembered in fragments, because so much of what was seen and said at the time was filtered on purpose. Silence became part of the story. Conscientious objectors faced prison for refusing to fight. Not everyone who said no was a coward, and the war forced societies to confront that difference. Conscientious objectors refused military service for moral, political, or religious reasons, even when refusal could ruin their lives. Some accepted alternative work, such as farming, medical support, or labor roles, while others rejected any involvement and faced harsher punishment. Courts and tribunals questioned their beliefs, sometimes with open contempt, and communities often treated them as traitors. Families were split, friendships collapsed, and public shaming could be relentless. In prison, objectors endured hard conditions, and some were repeatedly punished for continuing to resist. Their stance raised an uncomfortable question in wartime. Does a state own a person's body when survival is at stake? The debates did not end with the armistice. They influenced future laws, civil liberties arguments, and how nations define duty. In a war of mass mobilization, refusal became its own kind of battlefield. Colonial soldiers fought in Europe, far from their homes. European powers did not fight with European manpower alone. Troops from colonies and protectorates were recruited, conscripted, or persuaded to serve, then shipped across oceans to a continent many had never seen. Some arrived to unfamiliar cold, strange food and languages they could not understand, and then were sent into trenches that looked like another planet. Their presence challenged assumptions on both sides. In European towns, civilians saw uniforms and faces that revealed the empire's reach. On the battlefield, colonial units were praised for bravery, stereotyped unfairly, and sometimes placed in the most dangerous roles. They also carried their own hopes, since service could be tied to promises of respect, reform, or political change. After the war, many returned to societies that had been altered by their absence and by what they had learned abroad. Their stories show that the Western Front was never only a European stage. It was an imperial one. Indian troops served on the Western Front in harsh winters. Men from British India were among the first non-European soldiers to fight in France and Belgium, and they arrived when the war still felt fast and uncertain. The climate was a shock. Cold rains, freezing nights, and unfamiliar trenches tested bodies that had trained in very different conditions. Yet these units fought in major engagements and held lines under heavy pressure, often while learning new weapons and tactics at speed. Their letters home, when they made it past censors, describe awe at European cities and the strange closeness of trench life. Religious practice and diet were constant concerns, and armies had to adapt supplies to keep morale from collapsing. The experience also traveled back through families and villages, shaping how people understood the empire that governed them. Service could bring pride, and it could bring anger, especially when sacrifices were met with limited recognition. Their presence on the Western Front is a reminder that the war's heartbeats came from far beyond Europe. African carriers moved supplies across brutal East African terrain. In East Africa, the war looked nothing like the Western Front. Roads were scarce, railways were limited, and armies depended on human transport to move food, ammunition, and medical equipment. Vast numbers of African carriers were recruited, often under coercion, and they marched long distances with heavy loads through heat, rain, and disease. Malaria, dysentery, and exhaustion killed many, and burials could happen quickly by the trail. The scale of this labor was so great that it reshaped local economies, since men were taken from farms and villages for months at a time. Carriers were essential to every campaign decision, because without them, an army could not advance or even survive. Yet their names were often missing from official glory stories. The East African campaign shows a hard truth about empire and war. The front line is not only where bullets fly, it is also where bodies carry the weight of strategy, step after step. Chinese laborers worked behind lines, building roads and railways. As the wall ground on, the demand for labor became desperate, and tens of thousands of Chinese workers were recruited to support the Allied effort. They were not combat troops, yet their work was vital. They unloaded ships, repaired rail lines, dug trenches and drainage, built depots, and cleared wreckage so supplies could keep moving. Many lived in camps under strict rules, with language barriers that made daily life harder and accidents more likely. They also worked in dangerous zones, where unexploded shells and air raids could turn a shift into a disaster. Some later helped with the grim task of recovering bodies and restoring shattered landscapes after fighting ended. Their contribution was often overlooked in popular memory, yet the war's machinery depended on it. These workers were part of a global movement of people pulled into Europe by necessity, contract, and politics. Their presence reminds you that modern war is built on labor as much as courage. The Ottoman Empire fought on multiple fronts at once. From the Caucasus to the Sinai, and from Mesopotamia to the Dardanelles, Ottoman commanders faced a war that pulled in every direction. The empire had to defend long coastlines, long borders, and long supply routes that were fragile even in peacetime. Railways were limited, roads could vanish into dust or mud, and disease could cripple units faster than bullets. The fighting also carried political stakes, because control of straits, cities, and holy places mattered to allies and enemies alike. Local revolts, foreign promises, and rival ambitions added pressure behind the lines. Each front demanded men, food, and shells, yet resources were never enough to satisfy them all. This stretched decision-making into a constant triage of priorities. The result was a conflict that felt less like one campaign and more like several wars happening at the same time. Gallipoli became a legend of courage and costly mistakes. Gallipoli was an attempt to break the stalemate by sea and land and to force a passage through the Dardanelles toward Constantinople. What looked bold on maps became brutally difficult on beaches and ridgelines. Landings met fierce resistance, and the terrain favored defenders who held the high ground. Heat, flies, and water shortages wore soldiers down, while narrow positions made every advance expensive. In this campaign, logistics and geography were as lethal as rifles. The story became legendary because so many participants believed they were part of something decisive, even when progress was measured in yards. It also became a foundation of national memory, especially for Australia and New Zealand, whose forces fought with determination under extreme conditions. Gallipoli ended in withdrawal, yet it left a lasting imprint on identity, leadership debates, and how people understood sacrifice. The Middle East campaign helped redraw borders after the war. In the Middle East, battles were tied to railways, ports, and rivers, and to political promises made in secret rooms. Armies fought through deserts, oases, and ancient cities, and victories were often followed by complicated questions about who should govern next. The region was not an empty stage. It contained communities with distinct histories, loyalties, and rivalries, and wartime planning did not always respect that complexity. As Ottoman control weakened, new arrangements began to take shape under Allied influence, including mandate systems that placed territories under outside bass. Administration. Lines were drawn that looked tidy on paper, yet they could cut across languages, tribes, and trade routes that had existed for generations. The fighting also boosted local movements that wanted independence, and those hopes did not always match foreign goals. When the war ended, the map changed, and the arguments did not stop. Lawrence of Arabia became famous through war and myth-making. T.E. Lawrence was a British officer who worked with Arab forces during the revolt against Ottoman rule, and his story grew far beyond his actual rank. He traveled in harsh conditions, negotiated between leaders, and took part in raids that targeted rail lines and garrisons to weaken Ottoman control. His influence was real, yet it was also amplified by politics and publicity, because wartime narratives need heroes who can be easily understood. After the war, his writings helped shape how the public imagined the campaign, mixing careful observation with a dramatic sense of destiny. That blend created a legend that sometimes overshadowed the many local fighters and leaders who carried the revolt. His fame also highlights a tension of the heart of the period. Promises were made about self-rule, and later settlements did not always fulfill them. His name endures, partly because it sits at the crossroads of action, storytelling, and contested outcomes. The Armenian genocide unfolded amid the Ottoman wartime collapse. During the war, the Ottoman government carried out mass deportations and killings of Armenians, and the scale of suffering was catastrophic. Families were forced from homes, communities were shattered, and many died from violence, starvation, and exposure during marches and confinement. The turmoil of war helped conceal the crime, and it also provided justifications that framed an entire people as a threat. Survivors were scattered across regions and later across the world, carrying memories that would shape identity and activism for generations. The events remain central to historical debate and international relations, yet the human reality is painfully clear in survivor accounts and in the disappearance of long-established communities. This is one of the war's darkest chapters, because it shows how conflict can be used to accelerate persecution on an enormous scale. Any understanding of the era is incomplete without facing this tragedy directly. Italy switched sides in 1915 and opened new battles. Italy began the war aligned with Germany and Austria-Hungary, yet it chose neutrality at first, then entered on the Allied side in 1915. The decision opened a new front that ran through difficult terrain, especially along the Isonzo River and the Alpine borders. Fighting there was a different kind of nightmare, with steep slopes, narrow valleys, and positions carved into rock. Advances could be measured in meters, and supply lines had to climb where roads were thin or non-existent. The change in allegiance also reshaped strategy, because Austria-Hungary now had to defend another major boundary while already strained elsewhere. Political hopes played a role too, since leaders expected territorial gains in return for joining the Allies. The campaign produced moments of breakthrough and moments of collapse, and it added a fresh layer of exhaustion to a continent already bleeding. Italy's choice did not simply add another army. It created another war within the war. Mountain warfare in the Alps meant ice, cliffs, and avalanches. On the Alpine front, nature was an enemy that never negotiated. Soldiers built trenches into snow, tunneled into glaciers, and hauled guns up paths that would challenge experienced climbers. Frostbite, altitude sickness, and sudden storms could disable units without a single shot fired. Avalanches were especially feared, because one rumble could bury a position along with its supplies and signals. Both sides used ropes, ladders, and cableways to move men and ammunition, turning peaks into strange fortresses of timber and stone. Combat could happen across a ravine, with enemies separated by a few hundred yards of air. Nights brought extreme cold, and days could bring blinding sun glare off ice. The battlefield was beautiful, and it was merciless. This front shows how the Great War invaded every environment it touched, not only fields and cities, but also the high places where survival itself became a dabbler. Daily mission. Romania entered late and was quickly overwhelmed. Romania joined the war in 1916 with hopes of gaining territory, and its entry initially looked like a fresh opportunity for the Allies. Yet the strategic reality was harsh. Romania faced coordinated pressure from multiple directions, and its forces struggled with equipment shortages, difficult terrain, and the challenges of Tau. Modern warfare arriving all at once. The campaign moved rapidly, and key regions fell, including the capital, which forced the government and army into a desperate retreat. For civilians, occupation brought hardship and uncertainty, and for soldiers, the speed of defeat was disorienting. Romania did continue fighting from a reduced position, and its later role would still matter, but the early collapse became a warning about how unforgiving this war could be to nations that entered without deep preparation. It also showed how alliances could promise support, yet geography and timing could still decide outcomes faster than diplomacy. Serbia suffered hugely, yet resisted far longer than expected. Serbia was one of the first targets of Austria-Hungary, and the pressure was immediate and relentless. Early invasions were met with fierce defense, and Serbian forces managed to repel attacks despite limited resources and staggering strain. The country also faced another enemy that does not appear in battle paintings: epidemic disease, which swept through crowded conditions and weakened society as well as Cha. The army. Eventually, renewed offensives and the entry of additional enemy forces made the situation impossible to hold. The Serbian army and many civilians endured a brutal retreat through winter conditions, a journey marked by hunger, exposure, and constant danger. Yet survival itself became a form of resistance because the army was not erased. It regrouped, it continued the struggle from abroad, and it remained a symbol that small nations could endure blows from larger powers. Serbia's experience sits near the war's beginning, and it echoes through the story of what the conflict demanded. Greece split politically as leaders argued over joining the fight. Greece became a battleground of politics even before it became a battleground of armies. King Constantine favored neutrality and had ties that shaped his view of the war, while Prime Minister Eleftherios Venizelos pushed toward the Allied side. The disagreement was not a quiet dispute. It divided government, divided the military, and divided the public, creating a national rift known as the National Schism. Foreign powers applied pressure because Greece's ports and position mattered for the wider Balkans and the Eastern Mediterranean. Rival administrations emerged, loyalty became suspect, and decisions that should have been strategic became deeply personal. The crisis shows how modern war can invade domestic life, turning cabinet meetings into front lines. Eventually, Greece did enter the war on the Allied side, yet the internal wounds did not heal quickly. The episode is a reminder that joining a war is not only about enemies abroad. Sometimes the fiercest conflict is over what a nation believes it is. Naval blockades starved economies, and hunger became a weapon. Britain's navy did not need to capture a city to weaken it. It needed to control the sea lanes that carried grain, fertilizer, and raw materials. Over time, the blockade tightened like a slow fist. Imports shrank, prices rose, and diets narrowed from choice to necessity. In Germany and parts of Central Europe, shortages spread from luxuries to basics, and families learned to stretch meals with substitutes that few had ever wanted. Coal became harder to obtain, which affected heating and industry, and that pressure fed unrest at home. The blockade also raised moral questions because it targeted an entire society, not only soldiers at the front. Officials argued it would shorten the war. Critics argued it punished children and the elderly. Either way, it revealed how modern conflict could be fought through logistics and calories. A nation might still have guns, yet lose strength, one empty pantry at a time. Submarines brought invisible danger to merchant shipping lanes. A submarine changed the ocean's rules. A warship is seen coming, yet a U-boat could wait under the waves, watch through a periscope, and strike without warning. Merchant sailors began to fear calm water because a smooth sea made a torpedo track easier to spot, and it also made a ship easier to find. Captains zigzagged, lookouts scanned for a small ripple, and crews slept with life vests close. The danger was not only the explosion. It was the sudden race to abandon ship, the cold water, and the long wait for rescue that might never come. Submarines forced navies to invent new tactics, from patrol patterns to depth charges, and they pushed shipping into a kind of nervous choreography. They also made civilians feel the war in a new way, because cargo ships carried food and fuel, not troops. When those ships sank, distant battles arrived at the dinner table. The Lusitania sinking hardened American opinion against Germany. In May of 1915, a German submarine torpedoed the British passenger liner Lusitania off the Irish coast. The ship sank quickly, and many lives were lost, including American citizens. In the United States, the event landed like a shock because it blurred the line between military targets and civilian travel. Newspapers printed names, photographs, and stories of families torn apart, and anger rose alongside fear about what modern war could do to ordinary people. Germany argued the ship carried war supplies and was therefore a legitimate target, which fed debate rather than ending it. American leaders protested, weighed neutrality, and watched public feeling shift. The sinking did not bring the United States into the war immediately, yet it became a symbol that returned again and again in speeches and memory. It helped turn distant ocean warfare into a personal moral question for Americans. Unrestricted submarine warfare pushed the United States toward entry. Germany faced a hard problem. It wanted to break Britain's supply lines, yet earlier restrictions on submarine attacks limited effectiveness and risked diplomatic backlash. In early 1917, Germany chose a more extreme path, allowing submarines to attack shipping without warning in broad zones. That decision was a wager that Britain could be starved before the United States could respond. Instead, it enraged neutral nations and threatened American commercial interests directly. Ships that had carried trade now felt like targets, and each sinking seemed to argue that neutrality offered no protection. American leaders also saw a wider issue of international rules, since warning and rescue at sea had been part of accepted practice. When those norms collapsed, trust collapsed with them. The policy did not stand alone. It combined with other shocks and pressures, and together they moved the United States closer to war. It is one of those turning points where a tactical choice created a strategic storm. The Zimmermann telegram offered Mexico a shocking alliance proposal. In early 1917, British intelligence intercepted a German message and shared it with the United States. The telegram proposed that if America entered the war, Mexico should join Germany, and in return, it would be supported in reclaiming lost territory in the American power. Southwest. The idea was daring, and it was also wildly risky. It presumed Mexico could wage war against a stronger neighbor, and it presumed Germany could offer meaningful support across an ocean full of enemy ships. Yet the message mattered because it was real, and its publication caused outrage. To many Americans, it sounded like a direct threat to national security, not a distant European dispute. The telegram also revealed the hidden side of the war, where code rooms and cables could influence armies. Mexico did not accept the proposal, yet the damage was done. The episode tightened suspicion, accelerated debate, and made the conflict feel suddenly close. Jutland was the largest dreadnought battle, yet changed little. In late May of 1916, the British Grand Fleet and the German High Seas Fleet met in the North Sea. It was the kind of clash naval planners had imagined for years, with massive battleships trading heavy shells over long distances. The fighting was confusing and fast, with smoke, poor visibility, and sudden turns that could bring destruction in minutes. Ships exploded, crews vanished, and the sea became littered with wreckage and survivors. Both sides claimed success because each could point to losses inflicted and tactics that worked. Yet the strategic picture barely moved. Germany remained largely bottled up, and Britain maintained overall control of the sea routes that mattered most. In a sense, that is what makes Jutland so haunting. It was enormous, violent, and technically impressive, yet it did not deliver the clean decision people expected. It showed that even the biggest battle can be swallowed by a larger reality, where endurance and blockade mattered more than spectacle. Convoy systems reduced losses by grouping ships with escorts. At first, many merchant ships sailed alone, which made each one an easy target for a lurking submarine. The convoy system changed that by turning separate voyages into organized groups. Merchant vessels gathered, followed a set route, and were guarded by escorts that could spot periscopes, chase contacts, and respond quickly after an attack. The idea seems obvious now, yet it required coordination across ports, schedules, and cargo priorities, and it demanded more escort ships than D. Navies thought they could spare. Convoys also created discipline at sea. Ships had to keep formation in rough weather, maintain speed, and follow signals that could not be openly broadcast. For submarine crews, a convoy was harder to approach and harder to escape because escorts were trained to hunt. The system did not end the danger, yet it shifted the balance. It is a powerful reminder that survival in modern war can depend on organization as much as bravery, and on teamwork across miles of water. Mines turned seas into hidden fields of sudden death. A sea mine is a weapon you do not see until the moment it tears a hull open. Mines could be laid by ships, submarines, or aircraft, and once in place, they forced navies to treat ordinary water like a trap. Routes had to be swept and marked, which created slow, risky work for minesweepers that sailed into danger on purpose. A ship might strike a mine far from any battle, and the explosion could be so violent that rescue became difficult. Mines also shaped strategy because they could protect harbors, block straits, and channel fleets into predictable lanes where other weapons waited. The psychological effect was intense. Sailors could endure gunfire because they knew where it came from. A mine offered no warning, no duel, and no chance to outmaneuver it at the last second. It turned the ocean into a map of invisible threats, and it made caution a constant companion. Zeppelins bombed cities and introduced the terror of air raids. When German airships crossed the night sky, they carried a new kind of message. War was no longer confined to distant fronts. Civilians could be targets in their own neighborhoods. Zeppelins were huge, slow, and vulnerable in daylight, so they often came at night, when searchlights and early fighters struggled to find them. Bombs fell on streets, factories, and homes, and even when the physical damage was limited, the emotional impact was enormous. People began listening for engines above rooftops, and cities introduced blackouts, alarms, and shelters. The raids also pushed technology forward, since defenders wanted better guns, better detection, and faster aircraft. For the crews, the missions were dangerous too, because airships could burn fiercely if hit. Yet the broader shift was already underway. The very idea of a city being attacked from the air changed public imagination. It introduced a fear that would grow larger in later wars, and it began the long story of the home front as a battlefield. Early anti-aircraft defenses learned by desperate trial and error. At the start of the war, most armies were not prepared to fight targets above the battlefield. Guns were built to fire across ground, not up into sky, and aiming at a moving aircraft was a new puzzle. Crews improvised with modified artillery, elevated mounts, and crude sights, then refined tactics as experience piled up. Searchlights swept night skies, spotters listened for engines, and communities practiced blackout drills to make targets harder to see. Pilots responded with higher altitudes, zigzag routes, and raids timed for cloud cover. Each adjustment forced another response, and a new contest took shape between attackers and defenders. These early defenses were imperfect, yet they mattered because they taught a lesson that would echo through the century. Air power could threaten far behind the front, and protection required coordination between technology, training, and public behavior. The first air defense networks were built in urgency, and they were built while bombs were already falling. The Red Baron became a global symbol of aerial combat. Manfred von Richthofen did not become famous only because he won fights in the air. He became famous because his story fit the new idea of a modern knight, fast, skilled, and terrifyingly precise. He flew with an instinct for positioning, often waiting for the moment when an enemy was boxed in by sun glare or low altitude. His red aircraft made him easy to spot, yet that visibility became part of the legend, like a signature written across the sky. Newspapers turned his victories into headlines, and both sides watched his name as if it were a scoreboard. He also led others, shaping a squadron culture that treated discipline and teamwork as life-saving tools. When he was killed in 1918, the reaction showed how new this kind of fame was. A pilot had become a celebrity in a war of mud and mass armies. Trench strafing turned low flights into near-suicide missions. When aircraft began attacking ground targets, pilots had to fly low enough to aim, and that meant entering the range of rifles and machine guns. A trench line that looked thin from above could erupt into a wall of fire the moment a plane dipped toward it. Pilots came in fast, skimming over trees and shattered buildings, trying to catch troops on roads, supply wagons, or gun crews in the open. The goal was disruption as much as destruction, to create confusion right before an assault or to slow reinforcements. The danger was constant. A single bullet could puncture a fuel tank, smash a control cable, or hit the pilot directly in an open cockpit. Some aircraft were adapted for this work with stronger frames and forward-firing guns, yet bravery still carried most of the weight. These attacks made the battlefield feel three-dimensional. Death could arrive from above, just feet overhead. Chemical weapons escalated from chlorine to phosgene to mustard gas. The first large-scale gas attacks relied on chlorine, which created a visible cloud and caused panic as it burned airways. Once both sides learned to recognize it, they saw deadlier options. Phosgene followed, less obvious and often more lethal, because symptoms could arrive later when a victim thought they had escaped. Then mustard gas added a new horror, because it attacked skin and eyes as well as lungs, and it could injure even through clothing. Each step pushed armies into a cycle of measure and countermeasure, with better masks, better alarms, and new tactics for surprise release. Gas also changed time on the battlefield. A shell burst could poison a trench for hours, turning territory into something you could not occupy even after you captured it. This escalation shows how quickly science can be bent toward suffering, and how difficult it is to put limits back once a threshold is crossed. Mustard gas burned skin and lingered in soil for days. Unlike gases that drifted away quickly, mustard gas could settle into shell holes, soak into earth, and cling to equipment. It attacked the body slowly, raising blisters that could grow worse over time, and it could inflame eyes until vision failed. A soldier might not even notice immediate pain, then hours later find breathing harder and skin beginning to burn. The persistence made it a tactical weapon for denial. An area could be shelled and then left toxic, blocking movement, delaying repairs, and turning rescue work into another hazard. Medical teams faced a cruel challenge because treatment required careful cleaning and protection, and that was difficult in crowded field conditions. The gas also punished civilians when battlefields overlapped farms and villages, since contaminated ground did not respect uniforms. It is one of the clearest examples of war creating an aftermath that continues after the last shot. The poison could outlast the moment that delivered it. Tanks broke through at Cambrai, surprising defenders and commanders. In late 1917, Cambrai became a test of what tanks could do when used in large numbers and with careful planning. Instead of a long warning bombardment, attackers aimed for surprise, hoping to keep defenders in place until tracks were already crossing wire. Tanks rolled forward with infantry close behind, crushing obstacles and opening lanes that had been deadly for years. For a moment, the front looked as if it might finally move in a dramatic way. The breakthrough mattered not only for ground gained, but for what it proved. Coordination, secrecy, and massed armor could crack a system built on trenches. Yet the battle also showed limits, because supply, fatigue, and counterattacks could blunt even a startling advance. Cambrai became a headline because it felt like a glimpse of the future. The old stalemate did not vanish that day, yet the idea of mobility returned. A battlefield that had been frozen began to thaw. Early tanks often failed mechanically before reaching enemy lines. Those first tanks were not sleek machines. They were experimental vehicles pushed into the worst terrain on Earth. Engines overheated, tracks slipped, and gearboxes broke under strain, sometimes within minutes of starting. Mud could swallow a tank to its belly, and craters could trap it at an angle where its guns could not be aimed usefully. Crews worked in brutal conditions inside, with heat, fumes, noise, and constant vibration that numbed hands and rattled teeth. Communication was difficult because voices were lost in the roar, and visibility was limited to narrow slits. Even when a tank reached the enemy, it might stall at the wrong moment, turning into a stationary target for artillery or close-range explosives. Yet these failures were not pointless. Each breakdown taught engineers what needed strengthening, what needed redesign, and how maintenance had to travel with the machines. The tank's early story is not just triumph. It is persistence through malfunction, repeated again and again, until the idea finally matched reality. New infantry tactics used small squads and infiltration movements. Mass waves of men across open ground had proved disastrous, so some armies began training smaller groups to move with speed and initiative. Instead of aiming for one rigid line, these squads looked for gaps, weak posts, and moments of confusion. They slipped past strong points when possible, leaving them to be dealt with by follow-on troops, and they targeted machine gun nests, command posts, and artillery, observers that held the defense together. This required better training and trust, because junior leaders had to make decisions without waiting for distant orders. It also demanded new tools, like more grenades, like machine guns, and quick signals between units. The mood of an assault changed. It became a series of rapid choices, not a single shove. Infiltration tactics did not make war less brutal, yet they made it less predictable. A defender could no longer assume the attack would come straight ahead. It might arrive from an unexpected angle, carried by a handful of soldiers moving like shadows between shell holes. Stormtrooper-style assaults exploited weak points instead of mass waves. Specialized assault troops were trained to break the rhythm of trench defense. They studied terrain, rehearsed routes, and learned to move quickly with weapons suited for close fighting, including grenades and compact firearms. Their purpose was not to capture every trench segment immediately. It was to rupture the system, to penetrate where resistance was thin, and to create panic behind the line. Once inside, they could cut telephone connections, seize crossroads, and force defenders to react without clear information. This approach treated a battlefield like a network, where a few key nodes mattered more than every yard of earth. It also required careful timing with artillery, especially short, intense barrages that stunned defenders before the teams rushed in. The results could be dramatic, yet they were also exhausting, since the attackers carried heavy loads and faced brutal counterattacks. This method helped reshape how commanders imagined defense. It was less like a battering ram, and more like finding the seam in a wall, then pulling until it split. Russia collapsed internally, and revolution transformed the war's balance. Food lines lengthened, trains failed, and trust in the old order cracked under the strain of casualties and shortages. In Petrograd, protests grew into strikes, and strikes turned into a political earthquake. The monarchy fell, and the provisional government tried to keep fighting while also trying to keep the country together. It was an impossible balancing act, because soldiers wanted peace, workers wanted bread, and peasants wanted land. As authority weakened, new voices rose through councils and parties that promised sharper answers and faster change. By the end of 1917, power had shifted again, and the state's priorities changed with it. For Germany, this was a strategic opening. For the Allies, it was a frightening gap on the map. A vast front that had absorbed enemy forces began to dissolve, and the war's center of gravity lurched westward. The Brest-Litovsk Treaty removed Russia from the conflict. When the new Russian leadership pushed for peace, Germany pressed hard for terms, because it knew the leverage was enormous. Negotiations unfolded in a tense atmosphere, with delegations arguing over borders, resources, and the future of whole regions. The agreement that emerged in early 1918 was brutally one-sided. Russia accepted major territorial losses and gave up access to valuable farmland and industry, all in exchange for an end to fighting on the Eastern Front. The treaty did more than change a line on a map. It freed German divisions to move. It reshaped civilian lives across contested lands, and it signaled that the old wartime alliance system could fracture from within. The decision also came with a price inside Russia, since it fueled anger and deepened divisions that would soon spill into civil war. Peace, in this case, arrived like a wound. Germany's spring offensive in 1918 nearly broke the front. With forces no longer pinned in the east, German commanders launched a series of massive attacks designed to win before American strength fully arrived. The opening blows used new methods, with fast-moving assault units probing for weak spots, then flooding through gaps to disrupt communications and artillery. Control, fog, speed, and shock produced dramatic early gains, and Allied lines buckled in places that had felt stable for years. Roads clogged with retreating troops, civilians fled, and leaders faced the terrifying possibility of losing the war in weeks. Yet rapid success carried its own trap. Advancing armies outran supplies, units became exhausted, and objectives blurred as plans met chaotic reality. The offensive also consumed Germany's best-trained soldiers, and replacing them was increasingly difficult. By summer, the surge slowed, and the gamble began to look fatal. A near victory had spent itself. Allied forces used American manpower to sustain relentless pressure. When the United States entered the war, the immediate impact was psychological as much as military. Fresh troops signaled that time was no longer on Germany's side. Bringing those soldiers across the Atlantic was a huge undertaking, involving ships, training camps, and the steady building of an army that had to learn modern war fast. American units fought under their own command in some battles and alongside Allied forces in others, and their presence helped plug gaps during critical moments. Just as important, the growing flow of men allowed exhausted Allied divisions to rest, refit, and return to the line with more strength. The arrival also changed planning. Allied leaders could think in terms of sustained operations, not just desperate defense. For soldiers in the trenches, it meant something simple and powerful. Reinforcements were real, and they were coming in numbers that could not be ignored. Momentum began to shift. The 100 Days Offensive pushed Germany back in rapid succession. After the spring crisis, the Allies struck back with a series of coordinated attacks that kept pressure constant. Instead of betting everything on one grand blow, commanders launched repeated offensives in different sectors, forcing Germany to respond again and again. Better coordination between infantry, artillery, tanks, and aircraft helped create breakthroughs that could be exploited quickly. German units fell back from strongpoints they had held for years, and the retreat was not always orderly. Rail lines were strained, reserves were thin, and morale was shaken by the feeling that the tide had turned for good. Each Allied success made the next easier, because captured ground included roads, rail hubs, and observation points. The pace mattered. It left little time to rebuild defenses, and it turned the war into a running battle rather than a fixed siege. By early November, German forces were still fighting hard, yet the strategic direction was unmistakable. The end was approaching fast. Armistice talks began as Germany's allies surrendered one by one. Late in the war, Germany was no longer supported by a confident coalition. One partner sought terms, then another, and each withdrawal tightened the circle. Bulgaria's exit opened routes into the Balkans. The Ottoman government moved towards surrender as pressures mounted in the Middle East. Austria-Hungary, strained by internal fracture and military defeat, began to unravel politically as well as militarily. These collapses mattered because they removed troops, resources, and strategic depth, and they also shattered the sense that victory was still possible. German leaders faced a grim arithmetic. Fighting could continue, yet the network that sustained it was falling apart. Behind the lines, hunger and unrest grew louder, and the military situation worsened by the week. Requests for an armistice were shaped by this cascade, because it is hard to bargain from strength when your partners have already walked away. Diplomacy arrived as a kind of emergency brake. Millions were missing because battlefields erased identities. Modern firepower could destroy bodies so completely that families received no remains, only a notice and a question mark. Explosions buried men in collapsed trenches, scattered them across cratered fields, or left fragments that could not be named. Over time, shelling churned the same ground again and again, so even marked graves could vanish. Identification tags helped, yet they were not guaranteed, and paperwork could be lost in retreat or confusion. For relatives, the absence was its own kind of wound. Without a body, mourning had no final ritual, and hope could linger painfully for years. Governments created missing lists, commissions, and later dedicated search efforts, but the scale was overwhelming. The war produced a new kind of grief, one shaped by uncertainty and distance. In earlier conflicts, a village might lose sons, yet still know where they lay. In this war, some simply disappeared into the landscape. The earth kept their names. Unknown soldier tombs became sacred symbols of shared loss. After so many dead could not be identified, nations sought a way to honor everyone at once. The idea was simple and profound. One unnamed body, chosen with care, would stand for all those who never came home and could not be named. Ceremonies carried extraordinary weight because the unknown soldier could belong to any family. A mother could imagine her son. A comrade could imagine his friend. The tomb became a place where private grief could meet public memory without argument over rank, wealth, or politics. It also created a new language of remembrance, with silence, wreaths, and eternal flames taking the place of battlefield noise. These monuments were not about victory parades. They were about absence, and the duty to remember what war costs. Over time, the unknown soldier became a kind of national heartbeat, returning each year in rituals that asked people to look back, not with excitement, but with sobriety. It was a promise that even without a name, a life would be honored. The influenza pandemic followed wartime movement and killed worldwide. As armies and workers moved across continents, they carried more than supplies and orders. They carried disease through crowded camps, trains, and ships where bodies were exhausted and medicine was limited. In 1918, a deadly wave of influenza surged through civilian cities and military units, sometimes striking so fast that healthy people were seriously coma. Ill within a day. Hospitals overflowed, funerals multiplied, and whole communities felt a hush that no censorship could fully hide. The pandemic's reach was global, and its timing was cruel. Just as many people dared to imagine peace, another crisis arrived that did not care about treaties or flags. The war shaped the conditions that helped it spread, yet the virus became its own catastrophe, with losses that rivaled or exceeded battlefield death in many places. The long-term impact was profound. because survivors carried memories of a season when danger was not only at the front. It was in the air you breathed and the hands you held. Peace terms at Versailles planted seeds of future conflict. In 1919, negotiators gathered near Paris to write a peace that would feel final, and instead, they produced a settlement many saw as a punishment. Germany was required to accept blame for the war in a clause that became a lasting humiliation, and it faced heavy reparations that strained an already shaken Braille. Economy. The treaty also limited the size of Germany's military, and it imposed restrictions on weapons and conscription that cut at national pride. Territory changed hands, and the Rhineland was placed under special conditions that made many Germans feel permanently threatened. At the same time, people outside Germany were disappointed too, because the treaty promised a better world, yet often felt like old-style power politics. It ended fighting, but it did not end resentment. When a peace makes millions feel trapped, cheated, or shamed, it can become a fuse. Versailles did not start the next war by itself, but it left the room smelling of smoke. The League of Nations was created to prevent another catastrophe. After 4 years of slaughter, many leaders believed peace needed a new kind of architecture. The League of Nations was designed as a place where disputes could be aired, pressure could be applied, and collective action could deter aggression before it became war. Its very existence was a sign that the world had learned something hard, that diplomacy could not be left to private deals alone. The League set up councils and an assembly. It sponsored humanitarian work, and it tried to turn international cooperation into a habit rather than a crisis. Response. Yet it faced serious limits from the start. Major powers did not always commit fully, and enforcement depended on members agreeing to act when it mattered most. The United States never joined, which weakened the sense that the League represented the whole post-war order. Even so, it planted an important idea. Peace is not only a treaty. It is a system that must be maintained, watched, and repaired. New nations emerged as old borders cracked and shifted. When empires fell, new states rushed into the space they left behind, and the map of Europe changed in a way that felt almost dizzying. Poland reappeared after more than a century of partitions, and Czechoslovakia was created from lands that had lived under imperial rule. In the south, a new kingdom joined Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes under one crown, an ambitious attempt to unite different peoples with a single identity. The Baltic states pushed for independence, and borders were argued over in conferences, in plebiscites, and sometimes in fresh fighting. These new nations carried hope because self-rule sounded like justice after imperial control. They also carried tension because borders rarely matched populations neatly. Minorities found themselves on the wrong side of new lines, and that created grievances that could last for decades. The end of the war was not only an ending. It was a political rebirth, with all the pain that rebirth can bring. The Austro-Hungarian Empire vanished into several successor states. For centuries, the Habsburg monarchy had held together a patchwork of languages, religions, and regions under one imperial roof. The war exposed how fragile that arrangement had become. As military defeats mounted and shortages deepened, nationalist movements gained strength, and loyalty to Vienna weakened in the provinces. By the time the empire collapsed, it did not fall into one clear replacement. It fractured into separate states, including Austria and Hungary as smaller nations, while other lands joined new or expanded neighbors. People who had once moved within a single imperial space suddenly faced borders, passports, and competing claims. Rail lines that had been designed for one economy now crossed hostile frontiers. Cities that once felt central became isolated, and communities that had lived side by side were pushed into new political categories. The disappearance of the empire was not only a diplomatic event. It was a daily shock, because an entire way of belonging dissolved almost overnight. The German Kaiser fled, and a republic replaced the monarchy. As the war turned against Germany, unrest spread at home, and the authority of the old regime began to crumble. Sailors mutinied, workers protested, and political leaders faced the reality that the country could not continue as before. Kaiser Wilhelm II abdicated and fled to the Netherlands, a dramatic exit that symbolized the end of an era. In his place, Germany became a republic, later known as the Weimar Republic, and it inherited an impossible set of problems. It had to accept defeat, manage revolution and counter-revolution, and negotiate peace terms that many citizens viewed as betrayal. The new government also had to build legitimacy from scratch, while veterans returned to a society filled with grief and anger. The shift from monarchy to republic was not a smooth handover. It was a leap made under pressure, with the ground still shaking. Germany had survived the war, but its political foundations had been rebuilt in the middle of a storm. The Ottoman Empire dissolved, and new mandates reshaped the region. The Ottoman state had ruled a vast and diverse territory for centuries, yet the war pushed it past the breaking point. As Ottoman control weakened, Allied powers advanced, local movements rose, and rival plans for the region collided. After the fighting, former Ottoman lands were reorganized through mandate arrangements under the League of Nations, with Britain and France taking administrative control over areas that included Iraq, Palestine, and Syria. On paper, mandates were meant to guide territories towards self-government. In practice, they often felt like a new form of outside rule, and people who had expected independence saw foreign officials and foreign borders instead. These changes also set the stage for later disputes, because boundaries were drawn with political convenience in mind, not always with local realities. The empire's end did not create a calm blank slate. It created a crowded future, full of competing promises, new authorities, and questions that would not settle quickly. War debts strained economies and fueled political extremism. The war had been financed on an extraordinary scale, and when the guns fell silent, the bills remained. Governments owed vast sums, and many had borrowed heavily from abroad, especially from the United States. Paying those debts meant higher taxes, austerity, or inflation, and each option carried social anger. In Germany, reparations added another layer of pressure, and economic instability became a daily experience for ordinary families. In Britain and France, the cost of rebuilding and caring for wounded veterans competed with the need to stabilize currency and trade. Across Europe, people compared their sacrifices with their living conditions, and many concluded that the old political parties had failed them. That sense of betrayal became fertile ground for extremist movements that promised simple answers, strong leadership, and revenge against supposed enemies within and without. Debt sounds like accounting, yet it can behave like a weapon. It can erode trust, turn neighbors against one another, and make democracy feel slow and powerless. The economic aftermath became a political storm. Veterans returned home with injuries that society struggled to understand. The war sent millions back home, and many carried wounds that did not end at the armistice. Some returned with amputations and learned to walk with prosthetics that were heavy and imperfect. Others were blinded, burned, or scarred, and they faced a world that stared, pitied, or looked away. Many also returned with invisible injuries, nightmares, panic, and a startled response that could turn a slammed door into terror. Families wanted their loved ones back, yet the person who returned often felt changed, older, and harder to reach. Governments built hospitals, offered pensions, and created rehabilitation programs, but the scale of need was overwhelming. Jobs were scarce in places where economies were still shifting from war production to peace, and that made reintegration even harder. Veterans formed associations, marched for benefits, and demanded respect, and their presence changed politics in many countries. The war did not end for them in November. It continued in bodies, minds, and daily life. Memorials filled towns because grief became permanently public. After the war, mourning was not limited to private homes. It rose into streets and town squares, carved into stone, and placed where everyone would pass it. Communities raised funds for cenotaphs, plaques, and statues, often listing names in long columns that made loss visible and undeniable. These memorials served many purposes at once. They honored the dead. They gave families a place to stand when no grave existed. And they tried to give meaning to suffering that often felt senseless. Rituals grew around them, especially on Armistice Day, when silence itself became a form of speech. Red poppies appeared as a symbol of remembrance, and their bright color carried both beauty and ache. The memorials also shaped memory, because what is carved in public space becomes part of identity. A generation grew up reading those names and understanding that history lived in their own streets. The war became part of the landscape, not only in craters abroad, but in monuments at home. Literature and poetry carried trench reality into peacetime minds. Some of the war's most lasting echoes were written, not shouted. Soldiers and veterans described the front in poems, memoirs, and novels that refused to polish the truth into glory. Writers like Wilfred Owen and Siegfried Sassoon used sharp images and bitter irony to show what modern killing did to bodies and ideals. Others captured the feeling of disillusionment, the gap between patriotic slogans and the lived experience of fear, filth, and loss. These works changed how later generations imagined the war, because they brought readers close to the trench line without uniforms or orders. The writing also influenced art more broadly. It fed modernist styles that felt fragmented, restless, and skeptical of old certainties. In classrooms and living rooms, these words carried the war forward, shaping how people talked about duty, leadership, and truth. Even those who never heard a shell could be haunted by a sentence. Literature became a second battlefield, where memory fought against forgetting. Battlefield photography changed how civilians imagined distant fighting. For the first time, many people at home could see war with unsettling clarity. Photographs showed trenches, ruined villages, and men resting beside smashed walls, and they did not need a storyteller to make them real. Some images were carefully staged because cameras were bulky and exposures were slow. Even so, the medium carried a special authority because a photograph felt like proof. Newspapers and postcards spread these scenes across countries, and families studied faces, uniforms, and landscapes, searching for meaning. Governments understood the power and tried to guide it, allowing certain images while restricting others that might damage morale. Yet the camera still brought the front closer than any earlier war had managed. It changed how civilians pictured sacrifice, danger, and distance. When you have seen a battlefield, even in a small black and white rectangle, it becomes harder to imagine war as pure glory. Modern passports and border controls expanded during wartime security fears. Before the war, crossing many European borders could be surprisingly informal for a great number of travelers. World War I changed that atmosphere because governments began to see movement as a security risk. Spies, deserters, and smugglers became constant anxieties, and states responded by tightening paperwork and surveillance. Identity documents became more standardized, and checks grew stricter at rail stations and ports. Even ordinary civilians could be questioned about where they were going and why, and foreign nationals could face suspicion simply for being foreign. These controls also shaped the economy, since trade and labor movement now passed through more gates. The war made the state feel closer because it reached into travel, employment, and daily routines. After the armistice, many of these systems did not vanish. Once built, bureaucracy tends to remain. The modern world of passports, visas, and monitored borders owes part of its shape to wartime fear. The home front became a battlefield of labor, hunger, and morale. While soldiers fought at the front, civilians fought to keep life functioning under strain. Factories ran constantly, farms faced labor shortages, and families managed rationing, rising prices, and the fear of bad news at the door. Strikes, protests, and political arguments flared because people disagreed about sacrifice and fairness, and because exhaustion can turn into anger. Governments monitored opinion, promoted unity campaigns, and worried about morale as if it were another front line. Children collected scrap, households saved fuel, and communities organized aid for widows and wounded veterans. This pressure also changed relationships inside homes, because women often managed finances and decisions while men were away. The war asked civilians to accept limits on speech, travel, and daily choice, and it treated private life as part of national strategy. The home front shows that total war is not confined to trenches. It spreads into kitchens, pay packets, classrooms, and the quiet weight of waiting. World War I ended an era of confident European supremacy. Before 1914, many Europeans assumed their power was stable, inevitable, and destined to expand. The war shattered that certainty. It exposed how fragile empires could be, how quickly economies could break under strain, and how much destruction could unfold inside the very heart of Europe. The conflict also drained resources and credibility, and it encouraged anti-colonial movements to question why distant peoples should accept rule from states that had nearly destroyed themselves. Outside Europe, new powers gained influence through finance, industry, and military participation, and the global balance began to tilt. At the same time, European societies were forced to confront mass death on a scale that undercut old myths of progress. Technology still advanced, yet it had been used to kill in new ways. After the armistice, Europe remained important, but it no longer looked invulnerable. The war marked a turning, where global leadership felt contested rather than assumed, and where history no longer seemed to flow from one continent alone. Its legacy shaped the 20th century, from politics to memory. The Great War did not simply end. It kept unfolding through consequences. New borders created new disputes. Economic shocks fed instability, and defeated societies carried grievances that could be exploited by ambitious leaders. Ideas about citizenship, rights, and state power shifted as nations remembered what total mobilization had required. Military thinking changed too, because tanks, aircraft, and coordinated firepower hinted at future wars that would be faster and even more destructive. In culture, the war left a deep imprint, with poems, novels, and memorial rituals that shaped how later generations understood sacrifice. Families carried private histories of loss, and communities built public monuments that turned grief into geography. Even language changed, with phrases and images that became shorthand for futility and trauma. This legacy matters because it reminds us that events do not stay in their own time. They echo through policy, art, and identity, long after the guns fall silent. To understand the 20th century, you have to listen for those echoes. As we come to the end of our journey through World War I, you can feel just how wide its shadow stretches. We began with a single moment in Sarajevo and watched it expand into a global storm. We moved from the first rush of plans and promises into trenches that became entire worlds of mud, wire, and endurance. We followed the rise of new weapons and new fears, from gas and machine guns to tanks and aircraft, that turned the sky into a battlefield. We also traced the quieter revolutions. The home front reshaped daily life. Factories, ration books, and propaganda pulled civilians into the struggle. Across oceans and empires, people were drawn into the conflict in ways they never expected. And when the war ended, it did not neatly close behind them. Empires fell. Borders shifted. Peace arrived with arguments still unfinished, and memory settled into monuments, poems, photographs, and names that could not always be recovered. Now, let all of that begin to drift back, like distant thunder moving away across the horizon. Let your breathing slow. Let your shoulders soften. The day you have lived is here with you, but it does not need to be carried tightly. You can set it down little by little as you rest. If you enjoyed this sleepy step through history, you are welcome to like, subscribe, or share a thought below. It helps the channel grow, and it helps others find their way here too. And if you happen to still be awake, there will be another video waiting on the screen, ready for your next late-night journey. For now, allow your eyes to grow heavy, and let the past fade into calm. Sleep well, and good night.